The morning the world seemed to fold in on itself, Elias Crowder stood alone beside the splintering corral fence, watching snow drift across the yard like ashes shaken from a dying year. Dawn had barely broken, yet the sky hung low and colorless, the kind that made a man feel like he was walking beneath a hollow bowl. The winter wind combed through the empty fields, whispering at the bones of the ranch as if urging it to let go. Elias curled his roughened fingers around the fence rail. Rope burns still crusted his knuckles, blooming red against his pale, cold skin. He had fought a young stallion half the night, trying to gentle a creature even the seasoned hands in town wouldn't approach. Now the horse sulked in the far stall of the barn, still as unbroken as the man who had tried to tame him. "I don't know how much longer you can hold," Elias murmured, not to the horse nor the land, but to the memory of his brother Levi, whose voice still lived in the creaking boards and dust. The ranch had been Levi's dream, not his. Elias had simply inherited what remained after the world had taken too much. Behind him, the ranch house sagged under the weight of unpaid years. The windows rattled in their frames. A shutter hung on one hinge, tapping out a slow rhythm in the wind, like a weary heartbeat. The ranch had once been full of laughter. Levi's booming voice, their mother's songs drifting from the porch, their father's quiet whistling as he worked the forge. Now, only ghosts kept Elias company, and they weren't much help in a hard winter. He pushed away from the fence. His boots sank into the crust of snow with a sound that echoed loneliness. He moved toward the barn, shoulders bowed not from the cold but the weight he had grown used to carrying. Inside, the scent of hay and old leather wrapped around him, familiar yet heavy. The animals stirred as he passed, more skin than strength now. Feed was running low. Winter was running long. He stroked the flank of the old mare, Juniper. "Another week," he whispered. "Maybe two." Even saying it sounded foolish. By the time the sun scraped its dull edge across the fields, Elias saddled up and rode into town. The cold gnawed at him as he leaned into the wind. Red Hollow wasn't far, just a scatter of buildings stitched together by gossip and grit. But every mile made Elias feel like he was traveling deeper into some truth he didn't want to face. He tied his horse outside the general store. The moment he stepped inside, he felt the stairs, quiet but sharp, like needles pressing into the back of his neck. Folks in Red Hollow had long memories and short patience for failing ranchers. At the counter, Sheriff Thorne Mallock stood with his arms crossed, coat dusted by snow. He turned just enough to catch Elias in his peripheral vision, his smirk small and mean. "Well, if it ain't Crowder," Mallock said. "Heard your stock's thinning fast." Elias kept his tone level. "Winter's been rough on everyone." Mallock's eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of a man who enjoyed watching a slow collapse. "Word is the bank's getting impatient." The store grew so silent Elias could hear the ticking of the wall clock and the rustle of a paper bag being filled somewhere behind him. "Appreciate your concern," Elias said, though they both knew it was a lie. Mallock stepped closer, lowering his voice enough that only Elias could hear. "You should have sold that place last spring. A ranch dies in pieces, Crowder. Yours is almost done." For a moment, Elias tasted the metallic edge of his own shame. Then he nodded once, turned away, and finished his purchase. He left without looking back. Outside, the cold struck him harder than before. He paused beside his horse, breath fogging the air, and closed his eyes. He had never cared much what Mallock thought, but today the words hit a bruise already tender. On the ride home, the sky thickened with snow, the world growing quieter with each mile. A ranch dies in pieces. Elias had buried most of them already. Hope, pride, certainty, one by one in the hard soil. Yet still he held onto the land with the stubbornness of a man who had nothing else to claim him. He reached the ranch by mid-afternoon. A faint curl of smoke rose from the chimney, the one reliable sign that the old stove hadn't quit on him yet. Something else lay on the porch, half hidden by snow. A folded letter. Elias dismounted, heart tapping uncertainly. He recognized the handwriting before he even opened it, the mail-order bride agency from Kansas City. He had written to them in a moment of weakness, a man drowning reaching for any branch the river offered. Weeks passed. He thought the letter lost, or the offer refused. But now, as he unfolded the paper, he saw a single line written in gentle, sure pen strokes. I arrived December 22nd, if still welcome. Mabel Rosewater. Elias exhaled, breath trembling. Still welcome. He was a man with barely enough food for his own plate, with a house that groaned in the wind, with livestock that grew thinner by the week. What kind of life could he offer a stranger? Yet he carried the letter inside, placed it carefully on the kitchen table. He sat for a long time staring at the ink, the curves of her name, the way the paper seemed lighter than the world he held. Snow deepened through the afternoon. As dusk approached, Elias lit a lantern and stepped outside again. The sky glowed faintly violet, clouds bruised with winter. He moved to the barn to check on the stallion. The animal snorted, restless. Elias whispered a steadying sound, though he doubted the horse found comfort in him. Beyond the barn, down the road that led toward Red Hollow, a stagecoach appeared, a dark silhouette moving through the falling snow. His heart lurched. Earlier than expected. He stood beside the barn door as the coach halted at the gate. The driver tipped his hat. Crowder Ranch. Elias nodded. A woman stepped down from the coach, small luggage in hand, cloak dusted with snowflakes that glimmered like faint stars. She lifted her head, and the lantern light caught her face. Soft features, steady eyes, a quiet strength beneath travel-worn edges. "Mabel Rosewater," she said gently. "Thank you for having me." Her voice didn't tremble. Somehow, that steadiness startled him more than anything. Elias removed his hat, unsure what to do with his hands, his breath, his entire world shifting an inch. "Welcome," he murmured. "Come inside. You must be cold." As she followed him toward the house, she glanced at the barn. Just a glance, yet in that brief moment, something flickered in her expression. Recognition. Curiosity. A knowing he couldn't place. Snow swirled around them, soft as whispers. And though they did not know it yet, everything in their lives had just begun to turn. The first morning Mabel Rosewater woke on the ranch, dawn crept in like a shy visitor, soft gold struggling through frost-fogged window panes, touching the floorboards like a hesitant blessing. Elias stood on the porch sipping coffee, watching the horizon pale, listening for the quiet sounds of a stranger moving through his house. He'd forgotten what it felt like to share a home with another breathing soul. Even her footsteps, light, measured, shifted something inside him. Mabel appeared in the doorway, cloak drawn tight around her shoulders. Her hair, loosened from its pins during sleep, fell in soft waves over her ears. She looked small against the vast winter stretching beyond the porch, and yet she held herself with a quiet certainty, like a wick that refused to flicker even in wind. "Good morning," she said. Elias nodded, offering the second mug he'd prepared for reasons he hadn't admitted even to himself. She accepted it with gentle gratitude, warming her hands around the tin. They stood there together in silence, the kind that didn't press or pull, just breathed. "I didn't expect the land to be so quiet," she murmured. "It's quieter in winter," he said. "Sometimes too quiet." She didn't ask what he meant. Not yet. Inside the barn, the air fogged with the breath of animals and the slow thaw of morning. Elias led Mabel through the stalls, introducing her to each horse as though they were the few pieces of pride he still possessed. She listened intently, eyes soft, expression thoughtful. When they reached the stallion's pen, the horse pinned its ears, nostrils flaring. Elias stepped protectively in front of her. "He's meaner than most," Elias said. "And too wild. You can ignore him." But Mabel didn't ignore anything. She took one quiet step forward, then another. The stallion snorted, but instead of recoiling, she lowered her gaze, not in fear, but in respect. "You've been pushed too hard," she whispered. "Haven't you?" Elias stared at her. Not at her courage, but at the way she spoke as if the animal could understand her. He opened his mouth to warn her again, but she lifted a hand slightly, not touching the horse, but close enough for the stallion to catch her scent. The creature calmed, just a fraction, but enough that Elias felt the air shift. "How did you do that?" he asked, voice low. Mabel stepped back with the same quiet grace she had approached with. "Horses see us clearer than we see ourselves," she said softly. "If you come to them heavy-hearted, they'll feel it before you speak." Her eyes flicked toward him, only for a heartbeat, but that one glance made Elias feel suddenly transparent, like she could read the worn places inside him he'd kept hidden from everyone in Red Hollow. As the days folded into one another, their bond grew not by bold declarations, but through small gestures. Mabel swept the hearth every morning, humming a tune that carried warmth into the corners of the house. Elias checked her boots, quietly repairing a loose stitch without mentioning it. She cooked simple meals that reminded him of childhood winters before grief hollowed the walls. He taught her the names of all the old ranch dogs buried under the willow tree, something he'd never shared with anyone else. Some evenings, they sat by the fire doing nothing at all. The silence between them became a soft thread, weaving something neither dared name. Yet beneath that warmth lived a shadow, the ranch's slow dying. The fields were thin. The feed was thinning. Winter bit hard, and hope bit harder. One night, as the wind rattled the shutters, Elias finally spoke the truth he'd been carrying. "This ranch won't last till spring," he said, staring into the fire. "Sheriff Malek's been circling. He says the bank will force a sale. Claims I'm holding onto a ghost." He expected her to look disappointed, or frightened, or regretful. Instead, she set aside her sewing, folded her hands on her lap, and simply asked, "What do you need?" No one had asked him that before. Not like that, not with such steady tenderness, without pity, without judgment, as if she believed he still had an answer worth hearing. He swallowed hard. "I need a miracle." Her lips parted. Not a smile. Not quite sorrow. Something in between. "Then we'll carve one from what we have." Elias stared at her, unsure how a woman who had traveled across states with nothing but 2 bags and a brave face could speak of miracles so easily. But she meant it. He could see that. A few days later, they rode into town to buy feed. The moment Mabel stepped off the wagon, whispers rose like dust on a summer road. "That's her," someone murmured. "Crowder brought himself a bride. Poor girl won't last the winter. She'll run once she sees the books. Or once she sees him." Elias stiffened. He opened his mouth, ready to defend her, something he rarely did for himself. But Mabel touched his arm gently. "Let them talk," she whispered. When Sheriff Malek strode toward them, eyes narrowed, Elias felt the familiar heat of shame crawl up his neck. "So," Malek drawled, gaze raking over Mabel, "this the girl you sent for? Brave of you. Foolish of her." Elias bristled. But before he could speak, Mabel stepped slightly forward, shoulders small but spine straight. "I didn't come for comfort," she said calmly. "I came for purpose." For the first time Elias could remember, Malek blinked, caught off guard. She turned away before the sheriff could recover, leaving Elias speechless in her wake. That night, as they unloaded the wagon, Elias watched her move through the yard, lantern light catching the edges of her hair. She walked to the corral where the horses shifted restlessly. For almost an hour, she stayed there alone, whispering soft sounds, gentle whistles, tiny gestures. And the horses, frail, skittish, half-wild, leaned toward her as though she was warmth in human form. When she returned to the house, cheeks flushed with cold, Elias couldn't help himself. "Do you know what you're doing with them?" he asked. She met his gaze with quiet fire. "I know what we can become with them." That night, as snow fell softly against the windows, Mabel unfolded her past in slow, deliberate pieces. She had traveled with a troop of horse-tamers when she was young. Watched. Learned. Understood animals better than she understood people. But men took credit for every skill she possessed. Every triumph they claimed as theirs. Every failure they blamed on her. "I needed a place where my hands could finally belong," she whispered. "A place where I wasn't invisible." Elias listened, heart thudding. "And this ranch," she said, gaze drifting toward the door where the horses slept in the cold, "this ranch is full of things waiting to be healed." In that moment, brief, fragile, and trembling, Elias felt something shift inside him. Not hope. Not yet. But the faint warmth of an ember refusing to die. By week's end, Mabel had touched every horse on the ranch. She moved through the corrals with a confidence that drew Elias's eyes again and again. The animals responded, their wild edges softening, their fear easing. She taught Elias small techniques, breathing, posture, intention, and to his shock, they worked. Still, even with their progress, the ranch's survival hung by a thread. Snow grew deeper. Feed grew scarce. Malek's pressure tightened. Yet Mabel did not falter. One night, as wind howled against the shutters, she stood from the fire, eyes fierce with an idea. "There is one thing," she said, "that might save this place." Elias rose slowly. "What is it?" "A demonstration," she whispered. "A gathering. All of Red Hollow watching. I can show them what these horses truly are. What they can become." Elias stared at her, breath shallow. "A show? In this weather?" "No," she said softly, stepping closer. "Not a show. A truth the whole town needs to see." And when her hand brushed his, accidental or maybe not, Elias felt something brave kindle in his chest for the first time in years. A spark. An ember. A beginning. The night before the gathering, the ranch lay wrapped in a hush so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. Snow drifted under a swollen moon, settling on fences and rooftops like powdered silver. Inside the barn, lanterns glowed low, casting warm halos across the stalls. Elias and Mabel moved quietly between the horses, checking feed, brushing coats, whispering calm into their trembling nerves. Elias watched Mabel with a mixture of awe and fear. She seemed woven from something steadier than bone, like she carried a secret thread connecting her to every horse she touched. Yet he could feel her pulse of worry too, faint but real, humming beneath her focused breath. "You don't have to do this," he said softly. She lifted her face toward him. Lantern light shimmered in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I do. For the ranch." "For myself," she answered. "Maybe for both of us." The way she said us made the cold seep out of his chest for a fleeting moment. Morning came sharp and white, the kind of cold that made steel ring like glass. Elias woke before dawn, but Mabel was already outside, boot prints leading toward the corral. When he reached her, he found her warming the horses with gentle strokes and soft, rhythmic humming. "They're ready," she said quietly. "Are you?" Her breath fogged between them. "I've spent my whole life waiting for a moment where my hands finally mattered. This is that moment." Elias swallowed. His throat ached with something nameless, something almost like hope. By midday, Red Hollow gathered along the fenced arena Elias had cleared near the barn. Folks muttered about the cold, about the Crowder Ranch, about wasting time on a fool's spectacle. Sheriff Malik stood near the front, arms crossed, wearing a grin that looked carved from spite. "She'll get herself trampled," someone remarked. "Crowder must be desperate. This'll finally settle the matter. Sheriff'll get the land by sunset." Elias kept his jaw tight. He wanted to tell them they were wrong. He wanted to shout it. But Mabel had asked him for one thing that morning. "Let me show them, not you." So he swallowed the fire and stepped aside. When Mabel walked into the ring, the wind softened, as though the world itself paused to listen. She wore a simple wool coat, gloves cut at the fingertips so she could feel the horse's breath. Her hair had come loose again, framing her face like the gentle edges of smoke. At first, the crowd only scoffed. "That slip of a girl. She ain't strong enough to break nothing." Then Elias brought out the stallion, the one no cowboy in the territory dared handle. The horse reared inside the pen, hooves striking the frozen air, teeth flashing. Gasps rippled through the audience. "That beast'll kill her." Crowder's lost his mind. Mabel stepped forward with the patience of a winter sunrise. Slow, soft, unshaken. The stallion snarled, pawing the earth. Snow kicked up like sparks around its hooves. Malik chuckled, leaning over the rail. "End this before it ends her," he called. "She's outmatched." Mabel didn't even look his way. Her world had narrowed to one creature, one wounded spirit staring back at her through the veil of panic and instinct. She breathed once, twice. Then she whispered something Elias had never heard before. Not words, a melody. A low, steady hum rising from deep in her chest, shaped by grief, by survival, by every road that had led her here. The stallion froze. The crowd fell silent. Her hands lowered to her sides. She stepped closer. Barely an inch. Then another. The horse snorted but didn't back away. Snowflakes clung to its mane like small lanterns. "Easy," she whispered, not commanding, not begging. "Offering." Another hum, soft as a prayer. The stallion's head lowered. Its trembling eased. And before anyone understood what they were seeing, the wild beast leaned its weight, slowly, impossibly, against her open palm. Gasps cracked through the cold air like breaking ice. Elias felt his knees weaken. Mabel stroked the stallion's neck, her voice barely audible. "You've wanted to trust someone for a long time." "I know." She turned then, just her head, and met the eyes of the crowd. Not proud. Not desperate. Simply honest. "This ranch," she said, voice carrying over the winter wind, "has horses that can change a man's life, if given the chance. They aren't burdens. They're worth saving. Worth investing in." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, from the back of the crowd, old Widow Stettler stepped forward. Her voice shook with age. "I'll buy one." A murmur rolled across the people. Then another man said, "I'll buy two." A woman beside him nodded. "And I'll take that mare with the white blaze." Money changed hands. Offers grew. People swarmed the fence line, no longer mocking but marveling. The cold seemed to loosen its grip. Sheriff Malek's face twisted sour. "This doesn't change anything," he snapped. "Crowder still owes the bank." "He'll have the money by spring," someone cut in. "After what we've just seen, everyone in Red Hollow wants a Crowder-trained horse," said another. "Ain't your decision any more, Malek." The sheriff's jaw clenched. For the first time, he looked small. Elias turned toward Mabel. She stood still, breath visible in soft clouds, eyes shining, not with pride, but with something deeper. Belonging. He walked to her, every step heavy with the emotion he'd kept locked away. "You saved it," he whispered. "You saved everything." She shook her head. "No, Elias. We saved it." Her glove brushed his hand. Not by accident. And in that fragile, shaking moment, beneath a sky clearing into pale blue, Elias felt something inside him finally loosen. The grief, the blame, the quiet ache of years. All of it gave way to a feeling he hadn't dared believe in. A future that didn't hurt to imagine. That evening, with the townspeople gone and the horses resting in warm stalls, Elias and Mabel stood at the corral fence beneath a sky full of cold stars. "You don't have to stay," Elias said softly, though it wounded him to admit it. "Now that the ranch is safe." Mabel turned to him, snowflakes melting on her lashes. "I didn't come for safety," she said gently. "I came for a life I could build with someone who sees me." Elias swallowed hard. "And do I?" Her smile arrived slowly, soft as dawn, warm as spring. "You do." A breeze swept across the fields, carrying the faint scent of thawing earth. Somewhere in the barn, the stallion whinnied, a sound no longer wild, but whole. And for the first time in years, Elias felt the world stand tall around him instead of closing in. Final reflection. A whisper to the reader. If you've ever stood at the edge of something broken, your dream, your heart, your sense of belonging, remember this. Sometimes life doesn't hand you miracles. Sometimes it hands you people who make miracles possible. And when grace arrives quietly at your door, in the shape of courage, or kindness, or a woman with steady hands and a wild horse's trust, let yourself believe. Because hope doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply stands tall.